Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. Ferrer, your professor and research in social studies. Our topic this afternoon is on the theoretical and conceptual framework. But first, we have to define what are theories. Theories are actually constructed in order to explain, to predict, and master phenomena such as explain, predict, and master relationships, events, or behavior. And out of this theory, a researcher can make generalization based from his observations, which might be interrelated, coherent set of ideas and models. So meaning a theory has to be constructed by a researcher in order for him either to explain or to make some predictions about the relationships of variables that he is trying to identify in his study. The next question is, what is theoretical framework? We have defined it in the previous video on what theoretical framework is. And again, theoretical framework is similar to the frame of a house. Just as the foundation supports a house, a theoretical framework also provides a rationale for predictions about the relationships among variables of a research study. So it is really important that the researcher has to come up with this theoretical framework. This is structure that can hold or support a theory of a research study. By this part of your paper, it introduces and describes the theory, which explains why the research problem you are studying exists. That's why before you can come up with a good theoretical framework, you have to read literature and studies that will serve as your basis in crafting your theoretical framework. Your theoretical framework will provide a context for examining your problem. Example, your theoretical rationale is used for developing your hypothesis. So, as a frame of reference or basis for your study, this can be used in your observations, in the definition of concepts that you're going to introduce, and the research designs that you are going to employ in your study, and the interpretations of your results, and in making generalizations or conclusion about the result of your study. So, in general, your theoretical framework serves as your guide to systematically identify logical, precisely defined relationships among your variables. Now, next question is, how are you going to create your theoretical framework? First, as a researcher, you have to identify the variables of your study. So in identifying your variables, you have to go back to your statement of the problem. What are the variables being covered in your study? And of course, it will be used also in defining technical terms found particularly in your statement of the problem. Next, you have to identify the relevant and related theories. That's why you need to consult literature in studies for you to identify some relevant and related theories that you can use in writing your theoretical framework. Then another is in creating your theoretical framework, you have to connect relationships of variables with respect to theories found in your literature and studies. The next, the theory also provides point of focus for you as a researcher to attack some unknown in a specific area in your research. And of course, if a relationship is found between two or more variables, a theory should be formulated to explain why that relationship exists. Okay? So that's how you're going to create your theoretical framework. As what I'm telling you before, in order for you to come up with a good theoretical framework, you need to consult literature and studies related to your present problem. Now, the next question is why there's a need to formulate the theoretical framework? What are its purposes? One is theoretical framework will help you as researcher see clearly the variables of your study. So as you are exposed to literature and studies from various authors, then you will see clearly your variables in your study, how it differs from previous researches, and or how it is similar to those researches. Next is your theoretical framework can provide you with general framework for data analysis, because as you analyze your data, you have to go back again to the studies that you have consulted for you to come up with a good analysis. And of course, if your study is a descriptive or an experimental research, it is essential to come up with a theoretical framework, because it will help you a lot in preparing your research proposal. To sum it up, a theoretical framework consists of concepts together with their definitions and existing theory or theories that are used for your particular study. So why it is important to have this theory? Because theoretical framework demonstrate an understanding of theories and concepts that are relevant on the topic of your research paper, and that will relate to it to the broader fields of knowledge in the class you are taking. So you are advised that at least you have consulted several literature and studies that will serve as your basis in coming up with your theoretical framework. Now, what is a conceptual framework? This is actually your outline of possible courses of action, or to present a preferred approach to an idea or thought. So, in short, a conceptual framework is the framework of the researcher. It is your own framework. While the theoretical framework are those which are being formulated by previous authors, previous researches, which you think are related to your present study. While your conceptual framework, this is your own outline of a possible course of action to be used in your study, or it is your preferred approach to that idea or thought. Conceptual framework consists of concepts that are placed within a logical and sequential design. So this is less formal structure and used for studies in which existing theory is inapplicable or insufficient. It is based on specific concepts and propositions derived from empirical observation and intuition. Or it may deduce theories from a conceptual framework. So, you can come up only your conceptual framework after you are done doing your theoretical framework, because your conceptual framework can be framed only after you are exposed to the theories and principles of authors that you have presented in your theoretical framework. Now, what are the purposes of conceptual framework? One is for you to clarify concepts and propose relationships among the concepts in the study. So, as what I am telling you earlier, a conceptual framework is your framework. So, this is where you're going to clarify some concepts or propose relationships among concepts or variables in your study. Second, it will provide a context for interpreting the findings of your study. So, through your framework, through your conceptual framework, you will be given context on how you're going to interpret the findings of your study. And another is, through your framework, it will help you explain your observations, or it might encourage you to develop a certain theory that is useful to practice. So those are the four purposes why researchers have to come up with a conceptual framework. Now, after you're done with your conceptual framework, you are now going to draw your conceptual path model. And there are some figures that we use in drawing a conceptual path model. And sometimes it is presented through your research paradigm. So you might use a direction of an arrow. So what this direction of the arrow indicates? So direction of the arrow indicates which concepts affect and are affected by another concepts. If a concept has an arrow pointing to it, it is called an endogenous concept. So this concept is being explained by other concepts in the model. Now, if a concept has no arrow pointing to it, its values are determined by relations that occur outside the model under study. Okay, so please remember, if a concept has no arrow pointing to it, its values are being determined only by relations that occur outside the model. So this concept is called exogenous concept. Now, sometimes you may use a solid line in your framework. So, solid line indicates that an abstract concept has been broken down into analytical dimensions for the purpose of creating operational definitions. So you might use a solid line as long as it is only used for creating an operational definition of a certain concept or variable. So usually, there are more abstract concepts that are placed above the dimension in a diagram to indicate a more abstract concept. Okay, next, you might also use a square. So, a square drawn around a concept indicates that this is a measured variable. That information reflecting the values of this variable has been obtained through some operational definition. So examples of directly measured concepts measured by one variable includes age, gender, and the like. So if you use a square drawn into or around a concept, make sure that such concept is a measured variable. And you might also use an ellipse drawn around a concept. So an ellipse indicates that this concept is comprised of information from more than one operationally defined variable. So sometimes it is termed as latent concept of variable, meaning that operational definition have to be created to measure such variable. Okay, so those are figures that we might use in coming up with our conceptual path model or in coming up with your research paradigm. So our next topic will be on the research paradigm and the relationships of variables in your study. So the variables I am mentioning earlier will be defined thoroughly in the next video.